dare.
Hey team, good evening. I got a request on the channel to create a video on how to build this amazing stove that you see in front of you. So thank you, Jack, for the request, and I am here tonight to acquiesce that request. So I've got all of the parts and pieces that we will need to set this up at my apartment. So we're going to go ahead and go there so that I can show you how to make this stove. One of the nice things about Final Fantasy XIV is you can have so many different housing areas in the game. You can have an apartment, which is super easy to find. You can have a room, a personal room in your free company house. You can have a free company house. You can have your own private house. You can have your own shared house that you share with someone else. It's pretty cool. So I've set up my apartment kind of as a housing workshop that I'll use to make videos on different housing items. I've also set up my UI to 150%, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing as I'm building this out. So we're going to go into our housing menu here, because in front of you, you see all of the things that are required to make the stove that I just showed you at my house. I know it looks like a lot, but if you are interested in housing, you're going to need and reuse a lot of these items for the different tricks, housing glitches, if you will, to build things. Not all of this goes into the stove. Now, 10 of the pieces do, so it is still a lot. However, the vast majority of them can be purchased just from any housing vendor for really cheap. So first, we've got what will be kind of the base of the stove, which is an Oasis desk. Then we've got what will be the burners of the stove, which are 2 Riviera stools. Riviera stools are also great for toilet bowls. So if you take an Alpine chair and you just move the stool into the center part of the seat of the chair, you can create a toilet pretty easily. We've got an Oasis leaf rug that we will be using to float some items. We've got an Oriental round table that we will be using to set the proper height for the dials on the stove. We've got a white rectangular partition. Now, you can use any partition. My personal favorite for doing housing items or housing setups is the white rectangular partition, and the reason is because they're smaller and they're really easy to move around. We also have a Riviera wall shelf, which is a necessity for setting up your house and floating different things. We've got 2 ashtrays for the smoke. We've got 3 Riviera table chronometers or clocks. We've got 1 Hingen Andon lamp, and we've got 1 Storm strongbox. Now, with regards to all these items, the only ones you have to purchase from our market board are the Riviera wall shelf, the strongbox, and the Oriental round table. The only one that will cost you anything remotely high is maybe the Riviera wall shelf, but the Oriental table and definitely the strongbox. I got that strongbox for 900 gil. All of this setup should not cost you very much at all, so that's definitely a good thing. So we're going to start with kind of our base, and when we're looking at the desk here, we are actually going to be using kind of the back side of the desk as the front of the stove, okay? And just so that you can see a little bit more of the screen, I think I'm going to go ahead and change the HUD back to its normal size. And then I'll put some text in the video that will help with direction. Otherwise, there's not much room there in the screen to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to move this rug out of the way. And the first thing I would recommend is figure out where you want to place the stove. So let's say we want to place the stove right there, right where we've got it. Now yours will likely be more close to the wall, but kind of set the desk where you want the stove to be. Now we're going to take our stools and we're going to figure out right about where we want the 2 burners to be. And one big recommendation I can make whenever you're doing housing stuff is, you see this button down here, toggle grid snap on and off. Whenever you can, which won't be always, but whenever you can, leave that on, because it'll make sure you have a square setup and that you're not off one way or the other. Now, you'll notice in this setup we won't be able to use it every time, but this gives us a pretty good indicator of about where we want the burners to be. And because we're using grid snap, we know they're going to be even. So I've got that right where I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and move my desk out of the way. And here's where I'm going to bring in my Riviera wall shelf. Move that out of the way, and my white rectangle partition. I'm going to get this partition nice and close to these burners or stools because we're going to be using this partition to float these where we want them to be. One thing that's maybe important about floating is you want to take the items from your inventory. There's 2 ways to float. Way 1 is you use things like a partition and a shelf to float it to a very specific height. And the other way is you can take it from your storage and kind of place it about where you want and use quick keys to kind of just place it. For this project, we are going to be using the first type of floating, where we float the object to a very specific height, which means we want all of these things coming out of our inventory. It just helps make sure that the glitch works versus storage. So if the items are in your storage for any reason, just move them to your inventory and you will be in great shape. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn our grid snap off, and we are going to grab our rug here, and we are going to use our rug to begin floating our stools. And if you haven't done this before, it's basically place escape. Place escape. So left mouse escape on PC, whatever it is on PlayStation. So place escape. And that did not float like we wanted. There we go. So see, wasn't in my inventory. I moved it into my inventory and then replaced it, and it worked. And you'll notice that the 2 Riviera stools are now floated on top of the rug. And to make sure anything that you float stays that way, what you want to do is go back into your housing menu and just give it a little bit of a move and then cancel it. So with the computer, I'm left mouse clicking, right mouse clicking, and what that's doing is kind of separating and setting those in place. Now I'm going to go ahead, just to be on the safe side, put my wall shelf back in my inventory. Now, if I can warn you about anything regarding housing, please make sure you are very cognizant of what layout mode you are in. I cannot tell you how many redos I've had to do because I had it on place in storage or place in inventory, and I thought it was on move or rotate, and I go to click it, and all that work, poof, gone. So if I can give you any advice, try to be better than I am at knowing what layout mode you're in. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the right layout mode, which is move selected object. I'm going to go over here to the wall shelf, and I'm going to place it. I've got counter surface placement on, but I've got grid snap off, and I'm going to cover the feet of the stool here, and I'm going to do my float trick again, which is place escape. And you'll notice what happened is the stools lifted up onto the shelf. I'm going to move it back into inventory. I'm going to make sure I go back to move selected object, and I'm going to continue to move these up little bit by little bit until I've got them at a height. Now you'll notice I'm being a little confident and not changing it to move object because I'm hoping I will not goof this up and accidentally place one of the stools back into my inventory. Now as you're doing this, you'll want to every once in a while check and see where you're at. Now that's pretty good. That's a pretty good height. You can see the burners stick up a little bit. I like to have a little bit more depth, so we're going to go just a little bit higher. I'm going to put the shelf back into my inventory. I'm going to move these around and just cancel them just to make sure that they're stuck. And check that out. That is perfect. That is the perfect amount of height I like for the burners so that you can really tell that they're standing out. So I'm going to get this partition out of the way now that we're kind of done with that for now. I'm going to turn my grid snap back on, and boom, just like that, we have a stove with a couple of burners. Now what's next? Well, next we can get this out of the way, and let's go with next the smoke. So for the smoke, I'm going to go ahead and move our desk out of the way again, and I'm going to take my two and actually I'm going to throw this stuff in my inventory just to make sure that we are all set from a floating standpoint. And I'm going to take my table here, and I'm going to take my ashtrays, and I'm going to place them right about where. Now you'll notice that the smoke is rising from the ashtrays through the stool, so it looks like the burners are smoking. This is a really cool effect. I'll tell you, I used like a dozen ashtrays in my house. So this is an okay place to turn grid snap off and kind of really set the smoke pattern to however you want it to be. I think that looks pretty good. I don't know about you, but it definitely looks like it's coming from the two burners. So now, to float an item using this method, we're going to grab the ashtrays with counter surface placement off. So I'm going to grab the ashtray, cancel. Left click, right click. Now that's going to allow me to remove the table, and check that out. I've got two ashtrays at a really good height to be sending smoke through the burners. Now, one thing I do like to do every once in a while is just kind of escape out of the housing menu just to make sure I've got everything locked in. Another mistake I've made is I've gotten really far in a housing project. I've escaped out of the housing menu and something fell because I forgot to click it and move it around or something. It wasn't locked in, and again, lost a ton of work. So I'm just trying to save you some time. Anyway, I digress. Back to turning these on. Now, if you look, we're getting pretty far with this already. I've got 2 burners smoking and the front of my stove ready. The next thing we're gonna do is let's go ahead and set up the one of the next challenging parts, which is the dials. However, what's beautiful about this is that the Oriental round table is the perfect height for the Riviera chronometers to work as dials. So here's what you do. You put one on the table, you go to rotate, use your grid snap so that you've got it perfectly straight, and here's where you want to toggle grid snap off. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your table here and you're going to get it to wherever you like it. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's get a little bit of a closer look here. Yeah. See, doesn't that look like a dial? Now again, to get this to stick, turn your counter placement off, grab that chronometer, give it a wiggle, and then cancel. That's going to allow you to move. This is something else that can come up, because when I put the table in there, the counter placement was on, and those ashtrays stuck to the table. So I'm going to move my desk out of the way. I'm going to put these back to where I want them. I'm going to grab them again. Now I'll probably have to go back to this. We're going to get our dials set up, and again, anything that is there you want to fix so it sticks. We'll probably have to go back to those ashtrays and do that again in a minute here. So I'm going to put my stove back. This is where the artistry of it all comes into place. A little bit of patience, and as I've said before, a little bit of love. So I'm going to put this on my table. I'm going to turn that. I'm going to turn off. And actually, I'm going to put this right on the back here. Hopefully, it won't grab. By putting it on the back of the table, hopefully it won't grab those ashtrays again, but we'll see. So I'm going to kind of set that up. Look, that one looks a little off. That looks good. So then again, I'm going to turn counter placement off. I'm going to grab both of these because they're both kind of on the table. And I'm going to grab this and see that worked. That worked much better. Because I put it on the edge of the table, it wasn't able to grab those ashtrays. Alright, so I'm going to place this by turning my counter placement and my grid snap back on. Put this one on the edge of the table. Go ahead and give it a rotate. Move it back. Turn this off. Give this a little bit of a closer inspection. Alright. So now I'm going to turn that counter placement off. I'm going to grab this one, just for grins, grab this one, move my table out of the way, and now we're really getting there. We've got our 3 burner dials, we've got our burners, we've got the smoke coming out of the burners. There's just a couple things left to do, and these are some of the easiest ones. So next, I thought this was a really cool little added flourish as I took this Hingen lamp And it just so happened that it perfectly fit right in there. That's all you had to do. Like literally just take the thing and put it in there. Now, why do it? Well, one, I think it makes it look a little bit more like a stove. Two, you'll notice that there's now a bit of light coming from it. So it adds a lot of the immersion of housing is what you do with lighting. And then last but certainly not least, I'm going to rotate this here. And I'm going to turn my grid snap off. And I'm going to grab my strong box. And this one I'm placing kind of on my own here until it's, you see how it kind of pops in and out? I think that looks pretty cool. So we're going to place it there. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, how to build the stove I had in my house. A couple other things that you may want to do is, now if we exit the housing menu just to make sure everything's still working, a couple things you may want to do. You may want your burners placed differently. You may want them spread more apart or whatever. You can certainly do that in that step. The other thing you may want to do is dye these items. I used jet black dye for my burners because it gave them that burner look. But if you don't want to spend that kind of money on it, you can use soot black dye. So we're going to use soot black for this one and this one. And we're going to go ahead and dye the stove the same color. And there you go. Now, one thing to take note of is you cannot dye the strong box. So it will be that color, but you can make the rest of the items, the burner and the desk itself, whatever color you want. You could make your burners blue if you want, or pink, or red, or aquamarine. I'm going to turn the lighting down just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to turn it down a lot a bit. And you'll notice we still have that ambient light coming from the stove. It makes it look more alive. It makes it look more immersive. And you can see the back here where that wall lamp is and how it's casting a light on the wall. When yours is closer to the wall, it's going to cast even more light that, again, makes it look alive. So that is it for this tutorial. If anyone else, like Jack, has a request, I would so appreciate it and be happy to make more videos about how to create any housing type items, that type of thing. So let's take a screenshot for our thumbnail. Done. And thanks for watching, team. Have a great one. See you in the next video.